Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety for in-person attendees?
For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
All right, thank you. And the safety video?
I'm Mike Reese, and I'm the Dive Safety Officer here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here is diver safety. I'm out here at the Oregon Zoo, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of this building. In the event of fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside the entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We will move on to our first agenda item, Council. We have the Metro Public Engagement Guide. I'm going to invite up Leah Waiwaiole and other staff that are with her, and she can introduce them as they speak. And there goes my script right off the screen. Council, as you'll recall, the last adopted Metro Public Engagement Guide was adopted in 2013 and aims to provide information to the public and engagement planning guidance to staff to ensure people have meaningful opportunities to stay informed or be involved in the regional planning process. Staff has been working to update the content of the guide to bring it in line with Metro values, current best practices, and key department strategic guiding documents. They are here to provide an update and a summary of what they've heard from key stakeholders so far. So I will turn it over to Leah.
Good morning. Morning, Council President, Metro Councilors. I'm Leah Waiwaiole, I'm Communications Director, and I use she, her pronouns. And I wanted to mention before we start that I am hard of hearing, and if you see me looking at my computer, it's because I'm watching the captions on the Zoom, and also it's really helpful for me if you make sure you're talking into your microphone when you talk. It is really an honor to be here today with Kimberly Abels and Gloria Pinzon to talk to you about the Metro Public Engagement Guide. We're going to be giving you a brief update on the progress of the report and then discuss some of the input we've received so far. Next slide, please. So just to orient us, and as Council President just shared, this slide shows our past and future touch points with Council in the coming months to work on this guide together. The last time we were here, as was just mentioned, you adopted the Metro, the guiding principles for meaningful public engagement that really set the foundation for the update of this guide. And today we're interested in hearing your feedback on the potential application of the guiding principles within the draft introduction of the new guide. With that, I'll hand it over to Kimberly.
Good morning, Council President Peterson and Metro Councilors. My name is Kimberly Abels. I use she, her pronouns. I manage the Strategic Communications and Crisis Team at the center of the agency in the Central Communications Department. My support of Gloria in this work has been on the steering committee and then also as a liaison to Metro's senior leaders. And we are incredibly proud and excited of where we are and to bring you this update today. The Public Engagement Guide will become a tool to help members of the public learn about Metro's work, how to provide input, provide guidance to staff for planning, and develop touch points for connection with everyone in this building prior to decision-making. The implementation of this work will really help strengthen and standardize our inclusion and accessibility practices, ensure consistency across Metro's departments, and hopefully demonstrate how you as counselors can help support us in this work. And just as a reminder, the Public Engagement Guide also meets the federal requirement for the public participation plan that Metro is required to have as part of the region, or as the region's metropolitan planning organization. Gloria is going to share with you where we are, ask a couple of questions, and gather your input. So I will pass it over to her.
Thank you, Kimberly. Good morning, Councilor President and Councilors. I'm Gloria Pinzon. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the project manager for this project. And it's great to be with you today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Next slide, please. One more. This next slide shows the timeline on the project. I just want to share with you all that a couple things about that are important. Right now, we have a public comment period open that is closing on February 2nd for people to weigh in on this project. And we are applying a staggered, phased approach for this project, which will help us meet our federal requirements to have a core guide adopted, and then add additional tools that are much needed in the appendix of the document. Once the guide is complete with appendices, we'll look at the ways that we can support users through the website and other tactics, potentially trainings or internal processes that can support the work. Next slide, please. This next slide shows you a breakdown of the core guide and what we expect to have 3 sections and an appendix. Today, we're focused on section 1, which is the introduction. It includes background information, history about the document, as well as a breakdown of the guiding principles, including the potential application and desired outcomes for them. Section 2 will be information for community members, partners, and businesses about Metro's work, how to contact Metro, and tools for connecting with council as well. Section 3 is guidance for staff on doing engagement planning, starting from the drafting of plans all the way to evaluation. And the appendix will have tools and information to supplement the core guide, including templates that we can update in the future. Once the content is complete, we plan to have it updated every 3 years after that to make sure that any contact information is up to date, including core information like major projects that are ongoing, things like that. Next slide, please. So throughout this process, I've heard from a lot of folks on this project trying to apply the guiding principles in terms of being able to hear from impacted future users and applying their input along the way. This includes community members, community partners, jurisdictional partners, and countless engagement and communications professionals. And the slide shows a couple of quotes that I've heard from these different audiences that summarize some of the themes that I've been hearing. And so I want to share a little bit about that with you because some of them I've heard this month, so it's newer information. And they relate to the stages of engagement processes, including planning, implementation, and evaluation. Some of the comments reveal a desire for us to recognize the need for right-sizing projects and adapting communication needs for diverse communities. The importance of listening first and having ongoing communication and connection with community members. Maintaining, and then not only showing how we apply the input that we receive, but reporting on it too. And staff want to ensure that we are supporting and not overburdening partners as much as we can. And I've also heard several things from this council, including the need for building civic leadership, continuing to work for capacity building, and that deep community engagement that we do, while making sure that we're making space for businesses and other organizations in our work as well. I heard guidance from Metro Council about applying engagement tactics outside of community advisory groups or committees, and which could include being out in the community, and that is something that I heard across other audiences as well. That was important to people. And there's also, I heard also a desire for people to hear from community members, for counselors to hear directly from community members. The draft introduction that was part of your packet today has some of these perspectives included, but the sections 2 and 3 that are focused on staff guidance and information for the public can address some of the other points that cannot be included here yet. Next slide, please. And so I want to share a little bit about my story, because as I was planning for talking with you today in this project, I was remembering my role and my connection to this work. 1 second. I want to make sure I cover everything I want. No, how's that one? Huh? I'm missing my notes for this one, but it's my story, so I can share with you. So this picture is a group picture of Momentum Alliance taken about 10 years ago, and I'm in the center of the slide. And the slide reads, "Our words matter, our actions matter more. Meaningful engagement has the power to create lasting benefits to present and future generations." And this is important because I think it relates to my experiences as a community member in being connected to Metro's work. The very first time I heard about Metro, it was through Momentum Alliance. And I was volunteering. I was still in college at the time, and I was volunteering with this organization, expanding my understanding about how systems in our community impact our everyday lives. And at the time, I was really focused on making sure that I was advocating for my community around equitable transportation and housing. And I remember fondly there a Metro staff member who was partnering with Momentum Alliance. Her name is Peggy Morrell, and I learned to trust Peggy in that process as a community member because of her transparency and because she showed up. She was consistent. And these are some of the things that I hear from community members as I work now, that transparency and having information is really important to people, as is showing results. All of these things are important for our work, and I'm really thankful that Metro has invested in community partnerships, and the fact that I am sitting here today and now able to apply my own skills and knowledge and connection to my community to advocate, to allow people space to advocate for their own communities is a testament and shows that it really matters what we do and how we apply our values. And with that, I would like to bring us back to our topic for today. So the guiding principles for meaningful public engagement were informed by several people, including you all. And the Public Engagement Review Committee wanted us to go a step further than just having the language of the 8 guiding principles, but to provide some guidance and context for people about what they meant and what we all mean. And so these guiding principles are not meant to be step-by-step instruction. That's for sections 3. That's for the section 3 of the guide. But to provide some context around, like, what do we want? How will we know if we're successful? And I hope that the council sees their input reflected in some of this work. And I do have printouts if that's helpful for folks. I'd be happy to pass them around. but they were included in your packet. But I have, if we could go to the next section, or the next slide, thank you. If we could go back to the question, thank you. So what I'm really interested to hear any feedback you have, and I'm also interested to hear if you have desires for the outcomes of these guiding principles. Pages 9 through 12 of attachment 1 of the introduction of the guiding of the public engagement guide show what's been drafted so far in terms of what we would like to see as desired outcomes, or what it could look like in practice to apply these guiding principles in our work.
Counselors, thank you, Gloria, much appreciated. And thank you for sharing your story of how you came to learn about Metro and the work. So much appreciated in that as well. Council, questions for staff on this question?
Would anyone appreciate a hard copy? I could be happy to.
I think we're
No questions, comments.
Oh, for goodness sakes, that's how this works, yes. Counselor, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
I would like to make a comment.
Okay.
I appreciate the great work that you've done. I think things have moved forward greatly. Community engagement is, as you know, a many-splendored and multidimensional kind of thing. Oddly enough, I was rummaging through some old materials, and I ran into the original 2003 or something like that MCCI engagement folder that I had, because I was on MCCI back then. And it was pretty rudimentary and not particularly satisfactory, and we struggled with how to get out to community engagement, and you've made some great strides. And the only comment I would make is there, and I think I've made this in the briefing session, is there a way to formalize or to make clear how we first identify what communities need to be involved? That the first step is sometimes it's an important step. In other words, the communities involved for Loan for a Cemetery are different than the communities involved for the Sherwood comprehensive plan. So that's a first step that I know you are aware of it, and I just think that I would just make that mention.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. Yes, in part of our guidance in the future, we have a tool staff called the Racial Equity Framework, and that does provide some steps in planning for projects early on to help us ask ourselves questions about identifying audiences. And so, thank you.
Can I learn quickly? One of the other tools that we hope to develop and will be included in further additions, right now as it was constructed a few years ago, it's called the Power Mapping Tool. There's a few words we might want to tweak there, but related to how different audiences, where they fit in these quadrants of impact, of an ability to influence. And so where do those different communities fit, and then how do we want to focus kind of on those corner pieces of those who are the most impacted, and if they have the ability to be to influence or not, those folks we still need are the ones that we really need to highlight and focus on. So it really, as we look through those audiences and identify who's going to be most influenced by this end decision or by this conversation, those are impacted. Those will be the folks that we really want to use this tool for, to be able to ensure we're reaching. So that will definitely be coming in sections 2 and 3.
Okay, Councilor Lewis, and then Long, and then Gonzalez.
Sure, thank you so much for the work on this. I think that it's really important that we keep moving forward rapidly, understanding, of course, that there are later phases or later pieces that will be added. But with it having been a decade, I'm ready to do a refresh, and I particularly appreciate the opportunity to be explicit about public engagement, community engagement, how they relate and are nested with each other. I also like that you are leaning hard into appendices to take what could be a really long document and make it feel shorter while still being the same number of words. So I think that's a really nice approach, and we should lean into that. My only question is, I know that in later document, phases, you're gonna do more on tribal, relations and how that fits in. But I do see on page 8, the reference to the tribal policy liaison. And I wonder if we should be a little bit more explicit that, if you're going to do something that requires government-to-government relationship, you need to engage the tribal policy liaison. Whereas if you're just engaging, urban indigenous community members, then proceed, according to this guide.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. That's very helpful feedback for the future sections of the guide.
Hey, Counselor Wong.
Councilor Wong, you are really hard to hear. I don't know what's.
Could you see if your mic is off, maybe?
Is that better?
Slightly.
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 Just speak up, maybe?
There we go.
Oh, there
Okay,
we go.
all right, there we go. Yeah, I appreciate all the engagement that, that you undertook in this process. I think that really models kind of how we want to move forward.
Thank you.
Let's see, my question is really around like, what's next after this adoption? And, you know, we have a great document here, but how will it be kind of adopted across the whole kind of agency? And I'm kind of curious kind of about what are kind of like potential consequences for non-compliance, both internally and also, I know we have all these like federal and state requirements that I saw. So how does it all kind of work together? Like we have, you know, this plan, this document, and now we have a piece of paper about how does it get adopted and implemented, and what happens if we don't?
Right, thank you for that question. So this document, I want to clarify that it's actually going to be both a refresh, but also bringing us up to speed about how we're already doing our work. There's a lot of, there has been a lot of advances in how staff are applying best practices. And so it's going to be, in a way, leading us to standardize what we're doing. And each department is still going to have their own guiding documents and responsibilities for their own particular projects. And I believe that this tool is going to be a supplement and support to that, not intended to supersede any legal requirements that departments are already having to comply with. And in terms of how we hold ourselves accountable internally, I think that that's a really good question. And one of the ways that we can do that is through further conversations as we're developing the next sections of the guide, including leadership and practitioners and our legal team. I'd be interested to have further conversations about that so that we can get on the same page about what expectations are for staff and how we can do that. Also, we have a communities of practice group that we organize every month. We meet, that's one of the few times where staff across the different departments meet together and discuss topics around public engagement practices. And it's right now we've been focused a lot on this guide just because it's going to impact a lot of our work, but those staff members in many different departments have informed and are informing the content of this guide. And so hopefully we're creating something that's taking into account the needs of the different departments. And that is one of the ways that we can continue to solidify and support staff as they're applying it. The tools I'm also very excited about because one of the difficult parts of being a practitioner sometimes and being in different departments is not having the benefit of seeing the tools that other staff are already using. And so that's going to be one of the benefits, is that in this document and any of the supporting online resources that we create for ourselves, there's going to be
support for staff to standardize our practices and keep us consistent.
I would love to add one thing, which is that we have really one important asset that we have to help implement and support this work is Gloria herself. Her role has really been focused on the development of this guide, but her ongoing role is to support this work and that community practice that she mentioned with continuing to convene people, make sure we're learning from each other, providing technical assistance, and keeping everything kind of connected to these principles and this way of doing this work, but also staying closely connected to council and our sort of our collective understanding of what's happening at Metro, all of those things, so that we'll be better coordinated across the incredible group of people who do this work all throughout the organization. So that's another, I feel like she's sort of the personification of the guide in a way. And it's really important, the tools are really important, but so are those, the people aspect of how we work together and how we support the work through that shared expertise.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's one of the outcomes I'd be really interested in is consistent kind of implementation across, the whole agency. Because I think in the past, whether it's, different budget sizes or whatnot, I think sometimes community members felt there was inconsistencies or like it was kind of a lumpy experience depending on which department you might be interfacing with, and how do we like kind of smooth that over so everyone has the same expectations and, experience, agency-wide. But thank you for the great work.
Very important, thank you.
If I could address the second part of your question there a little bit more. One of the interesting things we found about doing, digging into this work is not every MPO or any other organization that has these documents or needs them, they don't have to be adopted by council. Metro chooses to do that because it allows us to put all your values into this document. It shows us that we are committed to this work, and it helps us really be able to drive some really innovative things forward. And so by bringing it to you all and having your support and implementation and adopting it really helps us and put your public faces on it as well and puts our values into place. So I think it's incredibly important that we do remain keeping this adopted and keeping it fresh, even if it goes above and beyond what's technically required. It's a good practice for us to do.
Love to hear it. Great.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Councilor Gonzalez.
All right, sweet. Some things for me. First and foremost, a disclaimer. I am going to borrow that quote. Our words matter, our actions matter more. That's amazing. So if just disclaimer, if you see me using that, that's
You got it.
you can be like, but I'm just letting you know. Second, as I'm going through the document, I agree. I like the comments about how it feels concise but balanced. And I'm just thinking through this how excellent it would be for me to have this tool in other areas of my life, working on highly dynamic teams and expectations, communication, codifying practices. And so I guess that kind of leads to my next point, that I do see this as more than just compliance, although it is, an important compliance document, because we're codifying our best practices. And I just, I feel it to my core that Metro has really worked hard for, the last, I don't know how many years to really set the bar, raise the floor for what good engagement is like. And so I feel really confident about this document and kind of how, again, we're just raising the floor with that basic codification of things. I think one of the most important items that I've worked on, both while on Metro and in my career, is reducing barriers for people to engage. I think, I know you agree with me on that. And I acknowledge that it's mentioned here in terms of reducing barriers, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper, and this might be part of your work or it might be a follow-up thing. But I feel like a few years ago we discussed the practice of codifying like stipends for all of our committees, especially, and ensuring there's like a structural removing of barriers for people to participate in those formal spaces, while also recognizing that the document talks about, like engagement is not just those committees, and we can't have people come to MRC every time we want to hear from them. So I just wanted to ask about that a little bit in terms of community compensation or for our committees in particular. I know focus groups and all that is excellent, and that we need to continue doing that. So that's the one question I had, and wondering if that's come up, and where we are as an organization, and if that's already been implemented and it's happening, then that's my bad for not being on top of it.
Oh, no, that's a great question, Counselor. There's a lot of interest in this topic around reducing barriers, stipends being one of the ways that we can do that. And we're planning to include some guidance around this larger topic of reducing barriers and the creative ways that we can do that within the appendices of the document. So that's one of the things that is going to be added later. I recently, in the fall and the winter, I did a survey of staff to understand how folks are using stipends across the agency, as well as gathering resources that people are already using. Again, in terms of trying to really pair this practice relationship building with the step-by-step procedural and legal considerations that we have to have as staff in that process. And so that will be part of our work, is looking at that existing policy, evaluating, and seeing how we might need to update it to just bring it up to speed to where we are now and what we've learned so far.
Okay, can I small follow-up on that? You know, thank you. I'm not gonna negate anything you said. In terms of I feel like there is potentially a policy question there as well, in addition to the staff practice, and just kind of like pulling up to the 10,000-foot level. I mean, the Supreme Court is legislating on civil rights, affirmative action, on basic DEI initiatives in government and beyond. And so, I think for me, what I would love to see is like on our impact committees and things like that, having designated, I don't know what we like equity seats. I don't know what we would call them exactly, but where we're able to assign and appoint people specifically that have the benefit of reducing barriers to participate at the level of electeds, people that don't come with institutional backing and things like that, because there are huge barriers for, I think, for folks to participate at the level that we might want them to. Mm-hmm. But I recognize that kind of then begs the question about where does that fall between the kind of the legal requirements, civil rights, discrimination, things like that. And so I'm just kind of putting it out there that has been one of my aspirations for Metro, for the committees and the bodies that have some of the most influential power for recommendations to this body, that we're really taking into account and reducing those barriers to that level. So good luck.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. That's something that I'll keep in mind for any future updates, and would love to speak with you more on that topic if when the time comes.
Yeah, also looking at Carrie and Marisa, since this might be an area for them to get involved as well. So, but anyway, thank you so much, and that's it for me. Gracias, Gloria.
Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all for your presentation. I think it really hits the mark. You can tell when you've worked on the other side of Metro and you come inside and you especially around engagement. I really want to uplift and appreciate the ideas around multiple languages, and I know in this phase, we probably won't get there, but the next phase, what languages do you see being translated, this document being translated into? And then also want to uplift attachment 3. I think that transportation attachment is like gold right now, because it like explains it from every point, how you can get involved in the process, what the process looks like, what to expect. And I think that right there, that piece right there is like helping the public understand what to expect, what's next, so that they aren't left in the dark. That for me is meaningful engagement, and we're not leaving people off. So I just want to uplift that, but also understand the language translation, because that is a barrier. But also I want to plus one what he was talking about Councilor Gonzalez, about incentivizing folks to come and participate at Metro, particularly those low-income folks that we oftentimes
Yeah.
need to get information from so that we can accurately, draw a policy here at this level. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so to answer one of your questions around the language translation piece, we are for sure going to be translating this into Spanish, as that's one of the most common non-English languages that is spoken in the region. And there's 5 others that are identified as most commonly used in the region. And I will also share that what's really important is going to be Section 2, the information in Section 2 that informs people about the work that Metro does. I think particularly that is going to be important to translate and to make sure that our website is accessible, and being able to coordinate this information with existing department-specific information so that people can have the freedom to explore the topics that are interesting to them. Leah, would you like to share anything about our language approach?
I would.
In communications?
Sorry. We are also, the translation of this document itself and, of course, public engagement opportunities is really important. But also, we're looking at translation across all of our communications and touch points throughout the organization. And there's actually a great project that just launched that we'll be bringing to you later this year to update our language access strategy, which will get at all of those things and also build new tools for how we do that and new standards for ourselves around what we translate and how. And we're really excited about that and the opportunity it brings. We're also going to be working on updating the Metro website this year, and with a lot of additional translation in the mix there. And so I think like it is certainly, it's relevant to every individual thing we do, but it's also something we need to look at across the board, and similar to stipends and other things, really think about how to be more consistent and also give Metro staff the tools they need in order to do this easily. And we're really excited.
May I share one more thing about
Please.
this? Thank you, Leah. I want to take the opportunity to just bring in here a little bit of nuance about the process of practicing the translation piece, because I think it's something that we deal with as practitioners, as staff, often. There is the importance to, and it's important to understand that having the language, having the information in a specific language is really important and a great first step. But then it's thinking about if people, how are we reaching those communities? Do we understand how non-English speaking communities prefer to receive information, right? So those are, we do have some policy and research around that. For example, some people prefer the face-to-face information, and that's where our relationship building practices come into play. Some people prefer certain social media platforms. Some people prefer emails. So that's one piece. And then the other piece that's definitely important for all of us, especially leadership, to understand is that the ability for Metro to build relationships with those communities is also important to be resourced. Exactly. And that is something that we run into, we want to inform people about specific strategies and projects and have information on the website, and then having limited amount of places to then have them be able to self-explore. That's a challenge. So we're definitely keeping all these things in mind. And I want to share that with you all because I think it's definitely an important resource consideration for staff in terms of taking a concept and values that we believe in and then understanding what it takes from all of us to apply it at different levels of the organization.
Yeah. I will also add, as we dive deeper into specific parts of the region, that nuance also rises up. And so, like, I know one of my go-tos for translation, even if it's illustration, is Urkel, right? Like, they're really, really, really good at doing that. So I would also throw in there, illustration is one piece for folks to be able to understand the process, even if it's a simple loopgram or something, or, just making sure that the information can be conveyed in a number of ways.
Thank you.
I think that's also an interesting point, because when we talk about reducing barriers, one of the first things we jump to is translation. But I also don't want us to lose different accessibilities that we also want to make sure we're applying here. And so neurodivergence, and what does that look like, and how are folks be able to interact with our website? We have some really great research going on in that space. We have a PERC member who's vision impaired, and so interacting and working with him has really opened our eyes in some better ways we can do this work to make it more accessible for a wide variety of our folks. And so we have some also really great accessibility deep dives, both for the website and our content. So I think there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can really make this document accessible. That will be a really great part of how we implement it.
Look, y'all got it. Keep going.
Well, before we go back around for others, let me just say I am so proud, and I'm always bragging about the new ways in which we are doing business and bringing more voices to the table. So thank you for, this is probably not close to a decade, but at least the last 5 to 6, maybe 7 or 8 years at Metro. And I think it played out really when we were having our conversations with Reimagine Oregon during COVID on virtual, when it was called out that Metro really knew how to do this well, and all of the rest of the agencies in the entire state, region, city, county, they should be looking at Metro. It was pointed out we're not perfect. There's still so much more work to do.
Always.
But it was a very proud moment, I think, for all of us on that call. And I just want to say that goes to the hard work that this agency has put towards making sure that all voices are heard. I guess the things that I just want to reiterate, and you've heard this from me like a gazillion times, but it's how we look at how we all do our job, and that includes both the COO's office as well as the council office, and what we need in order to make final decisions and work with a very broad region that goes from Forest Grove all the way out to Gresham, from the Columbia River all the way down to Wilsonville. There is no single way in which, any of those communities, they all want to access differently, right? And I think that the understanding, and to Councilor Huang's point about the lumpiness, trying to get to some sort of agreed upon standard minimum for everything that we do, whether that's a weekly email that goes out to the frickin' universe, but we should not be assuming that people are paying attention because they have resources, right? We can't make that assumption ever, because the minute we assume, then we increase risk to our process, to the trustworthiness of our process, and the decisions going forward from there. So I think we as an agency, and I think I heard you pointed out business, but it's not just business, it's all of the organizations that have interest, not just in what Metro used to do, but all the things that we are now doing going forward on affordable housing and supportive housing services, like the interest in what we're doing and how we're doing it, and the oversight is paramount to continuing to have that high level of trust in the final decisions that come out of Metro that are fair for everybody. So I think just being able, we'll just add a little asterisk to that. It also goes to the ability of the organization to learn, because we never stop talking to anybody. We are always adding, right? We are always adding in, not just saying we haven't heard from, so we're only going to hear from. So I feel like between those two things, I don't know if I totally felt that when I read the document about the culture of the learning of the organization from everybody inside, but also are we helping with the learning between different groups? And I think that's a role that we used to try and play, and I'm not sure if I'm getting that we are bringing diverse groups together so that people can learn, and we are not the holders of all information. I don't think that's right. I don't think that we should be the holders of just one relationship or with information about how different groups view the importance of X, Y, or Z, right? I think it's our role to bring those folks together and say, now how do we move forward from here now that we all know what each other's needs are and different perspectives? So I would say, in terms of the actual input on the actual document that you guys need to get done for federal purposes, if there's any way to incorporate any language about a learning organization and minimums, because I think that's where the action is, right? We all want, every single comment around the table wants to talk about the action, but if we're not pointing in the right direction to get the outcomes and the action, I guess I would just say that those are the words that I was looking for and feel that we still need to incorporate somehow.
Okay.
Before final adoption.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to share that I'm excited about the prospect of continuing to collaborate and serving as a convener. I think that is the opportunity that Metro can continue to build upon, to convene people across different viewpoints and experiences. And I will share that is part of what I think the Public Engagement Review Committee wants us to do, and that I've tried to do my best in just even in the process of this document. And so I look forward to figuring out more ways that we can do that to continue to have more information and impact in our work together.
So if you could show me where that is, then I might feel a little bit more comfortable. But before we adopt it, I'd like to see and make sure that we're pointing ourselves in the right direction and not narrowing, but actually kind of opening ourselves up to that conversation on the other side of at least what does minimum look like and how do we continue to talk about what minimum looks like, and then what else needs to happen on top of that to make sure that everybody has the accessibility to Metro and accessibility to information across the viewpoints.
Thank you. I'll consider that for any future drafts of the document.
So I'm not getting, I'm not understanding what that means.
Oh,
Before we adopt or after we adopt, I
Of
guess?
course, before we adopt.
Okay.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you for asking me to clarify.
Okay.
The drafting of sections 2 and 3 specifically being around the processes that staff are going to be applying in terms of communication and engagement, are places where we could address minimum requirements for communicating and outreach and things like that.
So I'm gonna push a little hard. I don't think I'm being clear. I understand the actions are in 2 and 3. But before the first part is adopted, I want to make sure that it is clear that we're pointing towards, that we will be working on these things, and that we are putting forward the value of a learning institution in amongst ourselves and between stakeholders, and that we are going to be working on like what are minimums and then what needs to happen on top.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Before we adopt the first part.
Pardon my misunderstanding. I wasn't aware that we were adopting this first part. I thought we were just reviewing it and having, the formal adoption will be of the full document is my understanding. So this is all in draft form, 100%.
Okay, so we're not adopting before January 31st?
No.
So you're going to be submitting to the federal government something.
Can I repeat back to what I think you're saying? And hopefully fill in some gaps, because I think I know where you're going. So what you're hoping is that before the thing that we, and submit is kind of a strange word, but we upload to the website and then we tell the federal government, oh, it's here. But something that really focuses on how Metro is, we're not trying to narrow the voices we're hearing, we're trying to add more voices to the table, and that in these future iterations, we are going to show how we are doing that, and that we really want to make sure we are continuing to learn, add to the messages that we're hearing, and we're connecting groups and really getting back to that kind of convening role to bring different groups to the table to learn from one another. And that is part of this guide.
I would put it as a culture of learning, right?
A culture of, you say culture of learning? Okay.
I mean, that's what we should be promoting, and the accessibility for all. those are the two big values. I think we've nested a bunch of other values under there, but I'm not sure if I'm feeling like we're talking agency-wide about promoting or continuing that culture. I mean, I think we have been doing it. I think we need to be more explicit. I don't think we need to be passive-aggressive. I have said that it's 1,000 times about Metro. I don't think we can be much more out there and much more promoting the very things that we do well, and being clear about what our role is and kind of pushing on that. So I don't think it's a change in direction. I think it's being clear about who we are and that we are here for everybody in this region.
Yes.
But we have very specific needs in order to bring everybody to the table.
Thank
So-
you. Thank you both for clarifying that. And if I may attempt also to offer more specific response. So in looking at the draft application of the guiding principles and what I'm hearing from you today about being explicit about having a culture of learning as well as being accessible and informing the broadest base of members of the public, right? I feel like there's very specific potential outcomes we could write into desired outcomes into guiding principle number 2 on this, because it talks about transparency and Metro sharing, having information accessible to people, as well as guiding principle number 4 that specifically calls out our communications and engagement practices. That's another place we could address that. Is that more?
Well, if you want to be able to do that and have us reiterate and get any kind of feedback through policy advisors and stuff, I think that would be great.
Sounds
Because I
good.
don't want to slow you down.
Thank
And
you.
we need to upload that document. Having been on federal forms for transit agencies on all of this, yes, we just need to get the information in there. And I appreciate the fact we will be adopting the entire thing later. So that was my misunderstanding. So thank you for all of that. Councilor Rosenthal, do you still have a follow-up question?
Actually, yeah, a little follow-up based upon Counselor Simpson. To what extent do we think that AI translators will be helpful, or that we can incorporate them into our translation process? They're getting to be much better than they used to be, and could translate into more languages perhaps, and more consistently. Any ideas on that?
Do you
I mean,
have-
this is a speculative question.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for that question. Counselor Rosenthal was talking about AI translation and how that might fit in. I think one of the things we've also learned, yes, that is getting better. It's not always culturally competent, and it's not always gets at the meaning that we're trying to get to. So there was a while we threw around this term called transcreated about, it may not be an exact translation of what we're trying to say, but gets us to the right point. And, you know, it's not, we may call it a transfer station that turns into a train station in other languages because you're transferring trains. And so really trying to make sure we can provide that context. I think we really want to make sure that we stay on the forefront of technology while also making sure we are being culturally competent with those we are translating different languages into.
Thanks.
Councilor Lewis, did you have?
She touched on it with the transcreation.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for keeping us updated and in part of the process. I know that the council is obviously extremely engaged in this because it is part and parcel of what we do on a daily basis. And we are in this, this journey together. And we really appreciate the work and the new tools and the best practices and I think standardizing as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your input.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. All right, we'll move on. Next, we have our Urban Growth Management Decision Work Program status updates. As you all know, every 6 years, the Metro Council must determine whether the urban growth boundary has adequate land for expected housing and job growth. The last urban growth boundary decision was in 2018, and council will make another decision before December 2024. We have Malou Wilkinson here, our Planning, Research, and Development Deputy Director, and staff to kick us off. Malou.
Well, hello. We're really happy to be here today. We are here, I'm sorry, this is blocking my view. So again, I'm Malou Wilkinson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director of the Planning, Development, and Research Department. And we're here today, we have 4 of us here today to give you an update on the urban growth management work. And as Council President Peterson just said, every 6 years, you're asked to make a decision on whether or not our region needs more land added to the urban growth boundary to meet our 20-year forecast for jobs and housing. And so I wanted to let you know who's here at the table. I have Ted Reed, who is our project manager for this work, Aaron Key, who's the urban policy and development manager, and Josh Harwood, who I'm going to let him tell us what his title is when we get to him, but we're really excited to be working with Josh. And so if we could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to start out with just a quick reminder of why we have an urban growth boundary. And it really is just for a few reasons in the state that we've agreed that we should have an urban growth boundary to protect farm and forest land, to really focus development in places where it makes sense to serve with infrastructure, and to help reduce our carbon footprint around the region and in our world. It helps us to stretch limited public resources to invest in roads, in parks, in schools, and kind of the pipes, all of the stuff that we need for our communities to function. And while we're looking at the types of communities, we're also looking at how they function for the people. And so a lot of our work is ensuring that we're working towards a region where all people have a home that's affordable, and businesses and industry are thriving in our region. And this greater Portland area that we live in really is a great place to live, and we hope that it continues that way based on the work that you all direct us to do. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we have been working to implement the direction that you all gave us last year. We were last at the council in September of 2023. We gave you an overview of our engagement. We got some direction from you. We also had a conversation about conditions of approval should you end up deciding to bring land into the urban growth boundary to meet the regional forecast. We talked a bit about what that could potentially look like. And we've been incorporating your direction in our work. And so today we're going to focus on, we want to give you an update on the Urban Growth Report Roundtable. Again, you gave us guidance to bring more voices into the development of the Urban Growth Report, and that's what the roundtable, that's the purpose that the roundtable is serving, and we're excited to give you an update on that. And we also will give you an update on the letter of interest that we've received from Sherwood. It's the only, for Sherwood West, it's the only letter of interest that we have received. And so we'll talk a bit about that, and give you an overview of upcoming engagement, which it comes well after the last discussion that you had. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline. I'm not going to go through this again. You've seen it before. It's just a reminder that, again, the work we're doing now is intended to provide you with the foundation and the confidence to make the decision that you're going to be asked to make by the end of this year. Some of the elements that we'll be coming back to talk to you about over the next few months are the regional forecast, a capacity analysis, our housing needs analysis, and also an equity analysis, which is one of the pieces of work that you all asked us to do at one of the last times that we were here talking to you. I also wanted to let you know, so we do have 4 of us. We don't have a lot of slides, but we will happily take your questions as we go through the different people who are talking. So we wanted to be sure to open it up for that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to talk about the roundtable, and then if you have questions about that, then we'll move to Josh, and we'll talk a little bit about what we heard at the last roundtable, and then Ted will talk about Sherwood West.
Great, thank you very much. So we can go to the next slide. This one is a reminder of the groups that are involved in this UGB decision. You, of course, are the one that will adopt a decision at the end of the year, as Malou just said. MPAC will make a recommendation to you. This is very typical. But we have several other groups that are involved, and just so you are familiar with the language, you're familiar with MTAC, but we also have a land use technical advisory group, which is primarily city staff and planners from the different jurisdictions that have an opportunity to see our analysis as it's coming together, understand our methods, ask questions. We had a meeting with them this morning. We have a youth cohort. That is a new group formed this year. The aim was to bring new voices into the UGB decision and to educate and inform and engage this group of young people, and we're working with Next Up on that group. I'll say a little bit more about them later, and I'm going to dig into the stakeholder roundtable and talk a little bit more about their involvement. Next slide. So this is a graphic that was produced to help roundtable members understand their role. So the purpose of bringing this roundtable, a new group together, was to daylight the production of the Urban Growth Report so that people could really understand the analysis that staff at Metro do and that we provide to council to help inform your decision about the urban growth boundary. The stakeholder roundtable is all about helping us produce that report, understanding the how we do the analysis, and then having a chance to preview that analysis before it comes out in the report and make recommendations to us about what should be included in that report. So you can see that their involvement spans that blue area of the timetable there and the production of the report. And then the green part is the decision-making that happens with MPAC and with you and with CORE, making recommendations about the urban growth boundary using that data and analysis. So it started up as a group of folks most likely to question our analysis and not understand it. So those were a lot of businesses and real estate and elected officials. We came here and we talked about the composition of that group, and you added a lot of suggestions. And so the group has expanded over time to include many interest groups, farming organizations, academics, non-traditional builders, and a couple of members from our CORE committee to help us with our racial equity lens at the table. We've got a much improved gender balance and racial balance after working on that for several months. Next slide. I'm going to go through the different meetings that we've had with the group so you can understand the topics and the discussion that's been happening there. This is a really great graphic that I can provide you in a bigger size so you can dig into it. But what I want you to know is that we had a graphic illustrator that was at the first meeting with us where we had a brainstorm with the group about their hopes and concerns for the region and for this growth boundary decision. And it was a really dynamic and conversation. We bring this illustration back to every meeting so the group can remember where we started and where we're going and what we're trying to work on. And it's been a really useful tool. Also at the first meeting was a lot of orientation and helping folks understand this decision and what the legal requirements are for us in the process. Next slide. At the next meeting, we dove into the parts of this urban growth report, and there are three main parts of the report that is dealing with capacity. What capacity do we have inside the existing urban growth boundary to accommodate future growth? Demand, what is our anticipated population and job growth for the next 20 years? And then readiness, where do we have areas that are ready to grow and ready to bring in incorporate and bring in areas outside of the growth boundary in quickly and turn those into housing and jobs. We did a deep dive into capacity at the first couple of meetings, talking about our buildable lands inventory that's conducted by Metro staff, and then a Performa model, which is a new tool we're using this year to help with that capacity analysis that allows us to work in market factors into understanding what development is most likely in which areas of the region. So early on, we were really describing how we approach this, and later meetings we'll be getting into the results of those analysis. Next slide. And next meeting. After we talked about our approach to capacity, we dove into demand and started talking about how we take regional growth and convert that into understanding what those housing needs are and what the housing needs will be at different income levels. And Becky Hewitt explained from Echo Northwest as our consultant, and she came in to explain to the group how we approach that and how that analysis is done so that they could engage with her and ask a lot of questions. It was a really interactive meeting. And then our last meeting in January was online for the first time ever. We've had all of these meetings in person, which has been fantastic. But the ice storm had us put this one on Zoom. But it was an exciting meeting where we had several demographers and experts and economists come to that meeting to share with us what they're seeing in terms of trends for economic and population growth over the next 20 years and what some of the trends that have been happening in the last 20 years. We had Josh Lehner from the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, Todd Patowski, professor and chair of the Northwest Economic Research Center, Amy Vandervliet, regional employment economist, Ethan Sharvigan. Did I get that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Good question. Go for
PSU
it.
Population Research Center, Neil Marquez, also from the PSU Population Research Center, and Tyler Bump from Echo Northwest. And the panel was facilitated by Metro's own Josh Harwood, Tax and Fiscal Policy Director. He's going to talk dig in a little more and talk about what that panel said, but this is where we decided we would pause to ask questions. So do you have any questions for me before we move on?
Counselors? I guess just at this point, what have you heard we saw the giant thing that we couldn't read, the great graphic. Can you summarize it? Like what were your concerns and what were some of their concerns and some of their hopes and dreams?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the first meetings have been really good discussion between some of our consultants and some of the Metro staff about how we approach this, how we do the analysis, and then a lot of discussion and questions to really dig in and understand. The group has come with kind of a surprising amount of curiosity and interest. I was expecting them to be interested in the outcomes, but I didn't expect the level of openness and curiosity to how we approach this. So it has been a far less critical and far more curious, and that's a great thing to report. I think folks came in, and when you get a chance to look at that graphic in detail, you'll see concerns about essentially about there being an already determined outcome. So I think that one of the things we're achieving through this conversation by really opening up, daylighting is the term I used before, and having that dialogue and giving folks direct access to our consultants to talk about this is a better understanding of the process, that it's not cooked and that it's not decided. So I hope that we're turning the tables on some of those. But a lot of big regional policy questions are coming up that may be beyond the growth boundary decision. Things about, well, how do we get land ready for development? This has been a big topic of conversation and one that is also on that graphic. What are the things that are stalling that? How do we get more money into infrastructure? And then these things sometimes come up again as questions. For instance, how do you, when you're looking at the buildable land inventory and the capacity analysis, are we taking into account the costs of infrastructure and how that will limit our ability to develop areas both inside the growth boundary and outside? So really complex, good topics. So a lot of those are coming up, things that I think will want to be part of a visioning effort as part of the 2040 visioning when we take that on. And so the good news is that we're getting a lot of those topics built that will help us build that scope.
President Peterson?
Yeah.
If I could just chime in here too, one of the things that's been really interesting to see the group sort of grapple with is that the urban growth report and all the forecasts that we do are based on what we think is going to happen, not what we wish would happen or what we want to happen. And I think that has been kind of the underlying thing that has made people unsatisfied with the urban growth process in general, because these are leaders and movers and shakers in the community, people who have an interest, and they're like, but what if we want to get this? You're saying that that's not gonna happen, but what if we tried to do that? It's like, well, we could try to do that, but the urban growth report is not the place to do that. We're here talking about, a pretty technical process for determining, if given what we know, what is going to happen in the future. And so I think, as Aaron alluded to, there's a general realization now and acceptance that the conversation about what we aspire to be needs to be had somewhere else, whether it's in the update of the 2040 vision or some other process, but that the urban growth report and determining whether we, add or move the boundary is only one part of creating a vision for the future and, implementing it across the region. So the group is really grappling with that. Okay, what we think will happen versus what we hope will happen, what we aspire to be. And that aspire to be question, I think, is super exciting for just an opportunity for the Metro Council to really grapple with that and figure out what role do we play in that conversation outside of these discrete land use decisions.
Yeah, that's got a lot of folks raising their hands. I guess I'll just finish off by saying to me, it sounds like the difference between the backcasting and the forecasting that we do in transportation. What do we want our mode split to be and how are we going to get there versus what we can forecast for the future from what we already know, which we don't want to continue. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation because I think what's going to get really dicey as we go through this is because we don't have a parallel process in place, we're going to end up with unsatisfied all the way around because we don't have the what do we want to be when we grow up answer and what's it going to take to get from a forecast of the future to a backcasting. So I think we should be starting to think about how we narrow the gap in that unsatisfaction because I think we're walking right into it.
Well, but the great thing about the daylighting
Yeah.
and explaining the process to everyone is they're like, oh,
Yeah.
this isn't Metro trying not to, aspire to be something. This is the process, it's prescribed in state law, they're doing what they need to do. And I think, we are all trying to figure out together with them, what do we do with that unsatisfying feeling? And, how do we?
No, 100%. No, I think it's daylighting that, yes. I guess I was just saying, we could be proactive and try and
Absolutely.
reduce the time between these conversations. Because if we just say, well, we're going to take another 2 years to scope out planning to plan, we're just going to, right? So I think we want to avoid having to say that how do we bring these things together, even if they're offset by 6 months, that's fine, but not by years, right? So I think we'll come back around to that. But Councilors Rosenthal and Nolan.
Just a quick question. That one graphic you presented was quite fascinating and quite colorful, and had a lot of concerns and a lot of hopes. Is the steering group going to be, or have they already prioritized some of those? I mean, they're not probably all equal. Have they given any sense of priority items in those lists?
We're working towards that.
Okay.
I'll be honest, we have dedicated a significant amount of meeting time to these conversations with Metro staff and with consultants, and it's needed that time. So on a couple of occasions, we've scheduled time in a meeting to go back to those concerns and work on prioritizing them, and we never get to it. So we continue to work towards that goal so that another way in which we come out of this, not ignoring that, but keeping that graphic. That's why we bring this graphic to every meeting. Is to not forget about it, but to remember and to readdress it. So we're working hard to make sure we have that incorporated and work on that towards, as this group completes their mission.
Not a simple process, I think.
Councilor Nolan?
Madam President, thanks. I've sat in on several of the roundtable discussions just to get the flavor of who this, what this cross-section of stakeholders is saying. I want to compliment the staff on giving the background and putting it in context. Although the stakeholders were recruited for having a stake, a variety of stakes, what became clear to me early on is that there is quite a range of understanding of the urban growth boundary practices and laws, which the staff has done a fabulous job of closing that gap. I also want to point out that while it's a technical decision, it does frame a bit about where we see the region going. And it was particularly helpful as I watched the group absorb some of the presentations from the experts, for them to understand, you called it backcasting, that acres and acres have been added to the urban growth boundary in the past, and the level of development has not kept pace. We haven't filled up the spaces that have been added to the urban growth boundary. And that was a bit of an aha moment for most, even the more expert members of the stakeholders group. So again, thank you for bringing that out in a way that was an aha moment instead of a, no, we're not going to do that. It's been fascinating to watch them. It's an interesting cross-section of folks, and as they get to prioritizing, I think the conversation's going to get quite interesting.
Great, thank you. Any other questions at this point? Seeing no hands raised, go ahead.
Great, then I'm going to turn it over to Josh. But first, what I want to say is that the idea of this expert panel was to bring in, obviously, some different voices and folks outside of Metro to share their expertise. But it was also to set the stage for what would follow, which is the regional forecast. So we had folks talking about what some of the just general demographic and economic trends are and what that might mean for the future. So I'll turn it over to Josh.
Fair enough. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I'm Josh Howard. I'm your Fiscal and Tax Policy Director. I clearly need a new rebrand, I think. But I work in finance. I'm an economist by training, so our friends at Planning reached out and said, can you call up some of your friends and see if they want to come talk about this stuff. And so we pulled some of those folks together just to talk very high level. So what I'm going to present to you is a very high level kind of look at kind of what was discussed. But if we can go on to the next slide real quick. I think and I should say too, we collaborate on these slides. I will look at them more closely next time. That's quite a euphemism in the first bullet. But for those people, and so I want to make sure that that we just point out that deaths have outnumbered births recently in the state of Oregon, and that is likely to continue in the future. We are a relatively old state in terms of the ages of our population. It's a little bit different than even in Washington across the river. So that's something to note. We have the way to think about migration a little bit right now, and kind of one of the discussions we talked about is that there's still the same number roughly of people coming in. There's just more people leaving right now as we sit here now than had been previously. So we're still seeing the same number of driver's licenses surrendered at the DMV from other states. We're still seeing a lot of those things. We're actually seeing fewer Oregon licenses turned into Washington for some variety of reasons we can talk about if you want, but that's essentially what we're seeing is more people leaving in general though. And that can be a variety of reasons, and undoubtedly it has to do with the current state of affairs in terms of public safety and whatnot, and those challenges that we're experiencing, but it's also just in terms of the cost of living. There's fewer people that can afford to live here than could live here 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so that's the reality. Next slide, please. This is from Josh Lehner at the Office of Economic Analysis down at the state. This is their demographic forecast for the population for the state of Oregon. For Metro and the state, we'll use them relatively interchangeably here. We can talk about nuances within the Metro region because I think those can be interesting, but generally speaking, the state population will swing with the Metro area, just by sheer numbers. And what the point of this slide though is to point out is that, as Josh pointed out, if we were to look at this slide 10 years ago, the growth rates forecasted would be about twice what they are here. So in other words, the forecasts have shrunk quite a bit from the last time This was discussed by Metro, and these kinds of exercises were undertaken. Next slide, please. Speaking with Aaron and Malou and Ted, we want to talk a little bit about manufacturing. I thought that was important within the group. It's a huge deal in Washington County in particular, and so we wanted to make sure we made a nod to it. The bigger picture, manufacturing has been on a long secular decline for 40 years. We have done relatively better than the nation, but that doesn't mean that we've seen a massive growth in jobs. It means that we've actually kind of bounced along at best. And so in the future, we do think semiconductors is going to be a bright spot. We've got a lot of federal support there and state support. That will necessarily flow in outsized proportion to the metro area in all likelihood. And so we do think that there we'll see some benefit to the semiconductor manufacturing in particular. So I think that's all. Oh, I got one more slide. One more slide, please. And so just to kind of summarize a little bit about the discussion that we had, I think the important takeaway is today is fundamentally different than the discussion that we would have been having 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it's fundamentally different for a variety of reasons. Population decline was happening, population growth decline, I should say. We're still growing, but population growth was slowing even before the pandemic. And that's why I speak to things like cost of living and those kinds of things. We are already seeing that happen. And so the pandemic exacerbated some of those things. The pandemic also created a situation where things that we thought were gonna take place over 15 or 20 years, things like the automation of online meetings and those kinds of things and business travel changes, those things that we thought were gonna take a decade or two took place in a couple of years. And so we're still sorting out some of the ramifications of that, I think. But by and large, I think the important part of this group, to bringing it together, was just to reset and level set everybody to the idea that things are a little different. We don't get to decide necessarily where the growth happens and necessarily because it's really hard now. We're competing with a much broader set of places in the country because of our cost of living. So that was kind of the big takeaways. I'm happy to answer any questions or try and shed more light on those, but otherwise I can pass it back over to these guys.
I think we got a couple questions. Councilor Huang and then Nolan.
Great, thank you, Madam President. And I always find demographics fascinating. Two kind of phenomena I want to ask a little bit more about. The first is you mentioned one of the reasons we have slowing growth is because of cost of living. But is there sort of like a tipping point? So we assume current cost of living, but if, for example, we were able to meet housing production goals and, instead of like 525 for buying a home, it's much lower than that. Is there a tipping point where that changes demographic outlook? Because we're kind of assuming stable growth in housing prices or not?
Let me see if I can ask the question back to you, and then I'll try to answer it. Are you asking sort of, we're taking into account when we're looking forward, we're taking into account the current cost of living, and we're also taking into account expected cost of living increases, right? So the way the models are built, they're built to anticipate increased costs of living over time. If in a model, you would bend that cost curve and make the costs either increase slower or fall, potentially, although falling has other implications that may be more difficult, then certainly you would have on the margins, you would have impacts where more people could afford it or less, depending on how fast or slow those would increase. Does that kind of answer your question? I think the problem is I think there is a natural rate of increase in the population that's happening in Oregon that's actually a negative number right now. So if we just took the stock population, deaths are outnumbering births. And so that's a function of the demographics that exist here currently. But certainly, obviously, if we somehow attracted an outsized number of 25-year-olds again and they could afford to live here, would those numbers change over time? I would, of course they would, but generally speaking, it's hard to get to a point where you see cost of living fall and not have other implications that are pretty damaging.
And if we were able to, meet the governor's kind of housing production goals, does that impact the model at all, or?
Now we're getting a little far afield. I'm not in the model. That's Dennis Yu's platform. I can tell you, generally speaking, Yes, it would change a handful of things, but it would depend on the model and it would depend on the circumstances by which you're running it.
Okay.
So
We're
that's
gonna-
not a great answer, but that's sort of the reality.
Since we're going to come back to talk about the regional model, and we're going to talk, this is just an introduction to demographics and trends generally. Since we're going to come back and talk about the regional projection, I'll take note of this and make sure to address that
That'd be
topic
a good
when
question.
we
I mean,
talk
if
about
that's the goal that's being set, like
Yeah.
what does that do for?
Yeah, how does that change the assumptions? That makes sense.
And then the other phenomenon I didn't really see was, I'm hearing more about climate refugees moving to our region. Do the models account for that? Like, is there some kind of like projection along with climate change trends nationally?
Great question, and something that comes up. It's come up for 20 years, so they're locally around these things. I will tell you that anecdotally and sort of from an intuitive sense, it exists, right? We know that there's been massive fires on really close to the Oregon border in California. Naturally, some of that migration will happen out of it. I will tell you that it hasn't been significant enough to explicitly include it in models very often. I have not seen where there's enough people that moving in numbers that it overwhelms other factors. That moving's a very personal thing, and so that's one factor of these things. I think it's reasonable to assume that as we've gotten more expensive, some of those refugees maybe have gone to Boise or Spokane or something else too. I think we need to think about those ramifications as well.
A lot of moving parts. Thank you.
Counselor Nolan, then Lewis, then Gonzalez.
Thanks, Madam President. One comment and one question. On the slide just before this one, I want to thank you for showing the full scale and not truncating it, which can exaggerate and distort the impact, the visual message of the graph. So thank you for paying attention to that. Then I want to go back to the last slide and open up a little bit conversation about what we mean by sustained economic growth. There are lots of different ways to define economic growth, and many of the conventional ones tend to be tilted toward investors, if you will, how the stock market's doing and things like that, and not toward people who are working for a living. So I'm curious about how you're defining that here and how we might, as a council, think about, not maybe in the urban growth decision, maybe in the what do we want to be discussion, how we want to define our economic improvement goals. I will put out that mine would be focused more on cost of living for median income households and basic needs being met for low income households. But where are you with this characterization?
That is a great question, and I will answer that with the first stipulation that I haven't given it a ton of thought in the framework that you just presented. But I will say that I think, and I'll let my colleagues up here can answer this question too. I don't think this is exclusive to me. When I think about that, I think about it in terms of increased jobs, increased prosperity writ large. So we don't necessarily make judgments about those that are been here for a long time and those that are coming here or that just got here, those kinds of things. But that when we talk about economic growth, we talk about the kinds of growth, better or worse, that we've had in our history, right? So you're thinking about good economic growth times, that's sort of where my head goes. Whether or not that is what council envisions or what we want, that's up for discussion, and that's absolutely a valid point.
And if I might, number of jobs created, unemployment rate, don't speak currently to what the earnings from those jobs allow the worker to do for themselves or their family. Doesn't speak to, median income compared with median cost of a home purchase. Those are the things I want us to be focusing on,
Yeah, to that end, I do try to make a point, and to your point, is that median incomes can go up for really bad reasons, right? It can be because a bunch of lower income people no longer live here because they couldn't afford it and they had to move out, right? We watch median incomes go up and we can feel really good about it, but there are factors, we need to dig in deeper into the numbers. So I appreciate your point.
Thanks.
Councilor Lewis?
Sure, thank you so much. Really appreciate this work. I was able to pop in and out a few times to the panel, and it was really great hearing from them, even though like half of them are from Colorado. I am curious if you would be willing to go in a little bit deeper on the Washington side. I know the recent tax restructure, we will soon see some significant changes in folks relocating across the river. But what are your other factors that you're seeing in Washington? How should we consider them, not only from a land use perspective, but from a how we define the region perspective?
Okay, Counselor, great question. Let me answer that a couple of ways. One is that anecdotally, we've known forever that people have relocated across the river, primarily within, say, a few years of selling an asset or something like that, in order to avoid the capital gain taxes in Oregon that they would pay. Or Washington has instituted a capital gains tax at 7% on capital gains. Microsoft, for instance, has increased their dividend by fourfold in response, so they're going to pay them out in dividends rather than capital gains. So there's other things that are happening around those taxes that we don't really know yet. They're still very new. Other factors, though, I do think that I had Tom Potowski, actually, one of the both panelists is a former boss of mine, and he used to say, yes, you can move to Vancouver, but then you'd have to live in Vancouver. That sort of derogatory comment doesn't necessarily apply in the same way it used to 20 years ago. I think if you spend time up there, it's frankly a lot nicer than it used to be, and it just is. And so it's going to attract different people. It's going to attract different things. The tax rate is still lower. It's only on capital gains up there. So those people that run consulting businesses or those kinds of things will still have the incentive to live over there. So I'm not sure we're going to see enough to go back to the earlier climate refugee point. I'm not sure we're going to see enough of an effect that we're actually going to see it in the gross numbers as much.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So councilors, I just want to call attention to the fact that we're at 12:10. We do have executive session and we do have another agenda item before we go into an executive session. So if these are questions that actually relate to the next time that we have a full conversation on this regarding the forecast, if you could just get your questions on the record and then we can move on, that would be great. Or if you want to submit them later, but if we could just keep it to what we're talking about today. So, sorry. Councilor Gonzalez.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll try and make a quick comment. I don't know if there's going to be a response to it, but I'm going to come out swinging a little bit, so brace yourself. But I have to express I feel really frustrated, and it's kind of rooted in this feeling that. And I acknowledge that this is not a vision process. This is a kind of a very prescribed. We understand what is technical, what needs to happen in order to be, to move the process forward. But the feeling that I keep coming to is, I feel like we're planning to fail. That's the thing that
We can do a phone call next.
Sorry.
it's okay.
Want to do that?
That's the thing that elevates for me. We know the housing shortage. We know the needs that we have in the region, and yet we're just, doing business as usual and kind of building in these assumptions that our structural housing deficits will continue. I know that we talk a lot about land does not always equal more housing. I understand that and I acknowledge that. And my comments might be more so in terms of, our region just really needs a vision right now. And so if there's an ability to supercharge this, 2040 refresh, if that's the place to have that conversation. But the feelings that keep coming up for me are, I feel like we're planning to fail. And I don't know, I don't know exactly how we address that, but I needed to get that on the record, and, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the conversation we just had regarding how do we deal with the regulatory portion? It seems like in all of our conversations, like waste and how do we deal with our regulatory and how do we deal with our desire for bigger, better societal outcomes? And I think that's what you're pointing out. And I think that's definitely what we're hearing from the stakeholders, which is what I think we all suggested that we have this conversation in a more public fashion. So how do you balance both of these things? So I think you're pointing out the right thing. And I think it has always been a frustrating process to go between what a forecast may show and the visioning. And I think we need more scenarios to get to the visioning, right?
Absolutely, and I think, the urban growth decision and adding land to the UGB is one tool that we have, and this is one process to use that one tool. And I think what you're getting to is creating that larger vision that needs to be updated. I mean, 2040 is almost here. And we know so much more about climate change and about what we need and racial equity, all these things that we didn't have when we originally established that vision. So I think the urgency that you feel and the frustration that you feel is shared by many. And I know that we as a team are feeling it too and are making plans to respond to that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marisa. And if there's more I could share too, I don't know if there's an opportunity for us to be more assertive in diving into, if there needs to be a conversation around the structural barriers to what we're facing. I mean, there's a CHIPS Act that allows the governor the opportunity to supersite. And also there's the possibility of legislation that will, allow for cities to add land. I mean, we're going around the process. And to me, that points to a structural issue. And I think many of us acknowledge that there's a need for that. So I'm not sure if the UGR committee has been able to dive into that. But again, I think we're doing business as usual because we need to do this process because it's on the timeline. I get it, but there's a need I feel like there's a need for us to do that. I covered it. At this point, I'm just venting. Thank you for listening, all our people that are zooming in as well. We can leave it there and keep the meeting going.
Yeah, well, I think we should figure out how to dive into what are the options in order to have some sort of parallel process that comes in as quickly as possible to be able to resolve this issue. I mean, this is the beauty and the difficulty of democracy, right? Is that it's supposed to be slow in order to be able to accommodate everybody's conversation. And that we don't move too fast and leave people behind. But we can accelerate the part that we know we are going to need to do. And the 5-year strategic plan had been an attempt to kind of jumpstart that conversation in a way that we felt people were ready to do coming out of the pandemic, because a 50-year vision seemed a little out of the range of what people might want to talk about, because they were looking at what they could possibly get done tomorrow, and that was hard. So I think we are still on track for a 5-year strategic plan for the agency, and getting down to the, what do we actually need in terms of housing and production, and who and how do we target, and what's Metro's role in the 5 years, for example. But I think we need to jumpstart, so we'll have to figure out how to accelerate that and how do we budget for that. And then what is the timing so that people feel like we are quickly moving on to the next step so that we can provide that context. So I'm looking at you guys to figure out how to help have that conversation. Let me hand it back to you are we close to summarizing?
We're close to summarizing.
Okay.
We just want to mention a couple additional things. I'm going to turn it over to Ted. And next slide, please.
Thank you. Thank you, councilors, Council President Peterson. Just very quickly, as we noted earlier on, this process is really centered around city proposals for expansions. We do the needs analysis, but we also want to keep focused on city readiness. Councilor Nolan had some comments about our past track record about expansions where we didn't pay attention to readiness, and the lands have sat there for a number of years. So since the adoption of urban rural reserves in 2010, we've also had a council policy to only add to the urban growth boundary urban reserves that have been concept planned by a city. So this process laid out a timeline for cities to make those proposals. We asked for letters of interest from cities by December 1st of 2023. We got one, as noted earlier, from the city of Sherwood. Their full proposal will be due April 5th. So their proposal will include the entire Sherwood West Urban Reserve area. So this is out on the west side of the region. It's about 1,300 acres gross, so that's the total acreage. About half of that is net buildable after you account for environmental constraints and future rights of way. Out of that 600 acres buildable, roughly more than half is for residential, and the other part is for mixed employment uses. So anywhere from about 3,000 to 5,600 homes, depending on the amount of middle housing that gets built. So those are townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, those sorts of housing options. So that's where the range comes from. And then up to about 4,500 jobs potentially in this area. So we look forward to continuing the conversation with Sherwood and with council about this plan that they have for the area and whether it offers a desirable option to the council if there's a need for an expansion.
Go ahead, next slide. So we are actively out there doing presentations. We are regularly at MPAC and CORE. Our youth cohort next meeting is in February. We've begun tribal outreach, and the UGR roundtable will continue through July. We'll be back to you, as we said, clearly talking about the regional forecast and giving you a chance to ask more questions, and we'll address these issues that have come up, talking about how we continue to have this conversation about the UGB and its formal process and this bigger questions about visioning and what we want to happen in the region, not only what we project through these economic analyses. And we're also going to be coming back to you to share results from our racial equity analysis and the data that we're collecting, looking at past growth boundary decisions and how that reflects on this one. So we look forward to coming back in February. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Just one thought, as you come back with a recommendation of how to proceed on the vision, there are several jurisdictions that put off requesting any planning money because they knew that they couldn't make an urban growth boundary expansion request for financial reasons. There was a whole host of them when I reached out, right? So I guess how we actually get our cities ready to have the bigger vision question, what resources will be available to them to be able to do the work at the ground level, because we won't be able to touch, I mean, we've been through this before, I have, way too many times, about, going out and doing the engagement at the ground level throughout the entire region, and what it means and the trade-offs, and what we need to put into a new vision. So, please keep that in mind when you come back with a recommendation on what needs to happen, who needs to be engaged, but before we jump into something that before we jump into the deep end. How are we defining the box and what resources will our partners need, both CBOs and cities?
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Much appreciated. All right, we will move on to Waste Prevention Environmental Services Investment and Innovation Grant Program Assessment Update. I will ask Marta McGuire, our WPES Director, to come up with staff and give us an overview of where you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council President Peterson and councilors. Again, my name is Marta McGuire, Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director, and I use she, her pronouns. And I have here with me Suzanne Peluso, and we're here to discuss the Investment and Innovation Grant Program. Suzanne has been managing this program and has extensive experience with it, managing nearly 80 grants over the program's life to date. We know we are on a time crunch, so we will do our best to move quickly and concisely through these slides and prioritize the discussion with you. So starting with the next slide, just a reminder of our department's primary mission to protect people and the environment, and we do that through managing garbage safely for people and businesses. Next slide. Our work is guided by the Regional Waste Plan that sets policy guidance for managing the impacts of materials and products. As an example, we are talking here today about the I&I program that's made a direct impact on multiple outcomes that are listed here. Next slide. We use a life cycle approach to managing products and materials on our mission to reduce waste. The I&I program focuses most on making direct investments into the end-of-life portion of this life cycle that's shown here in blue. Next slide. Key decisions and direction we are seeking from you in the coming months are listed up here: the systems facilities plan, the upcoming budget and fees, and other key policy items, including the I&I grant program that is our topic today. Next slide. We shared this roadmap with you at our last work session, just putting these key decision areas into context, and they lay out the topics and decisions that we are bringing forward to you over the next couple of months. The left bar includes the 3 key decision areas, and the dots represents milestones in each of those pathways, and we've used arrows to illustrate the relationship of the projects to one another. We've also listed the informational topics that are intended to support your decision-making across these areas, and our meeting on Thursday with you includes the informational topic on solid waste system financing, so we're also looking forward to that discussion. Next slide. Today's discussion on the grant program will help inform the program assessment and will also be used to inform next year's budget. So with that, I will turn it over to Suzanne to jump into today's discussion.
Thanks, Marta. Good afternoon, Council President Peterson and Metro Councilors. My name is Suzanne Peluso. I use she, her pronouns, and I manage the Investment Innovation Grant Program in WPEZ. And next slide, please. So I'm going to try to move quickly. I know we're on a time crunch here, but and get to the meat of the discussion today. So next slide. So just a quick grounding of where this program has been so far. It was established in 2018 by the Metro Council to invest in creative ways to reduce waste and prevent waste in the private sector. So that's nonprofit organizations and private businesses. It was initially a 3-year pilot program, and we did an evaluation after the 3rd grant cycle in 2020. We received feedback from council that to continue the program, but to strengthen the equity outcomes and develop specific performance measures. We did that and had 2 more grant cycles in 2022 and 2023. And over the 5 grant cycles, we have awarded 84 grants, capital and program grants, totaling almost $13 million. That is out of 300 proposals requesting over $50 million. So the program's become very popular, and we have a pretty incredible demand on the funding at this point. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick snapshot of some of the program impacts that we highlighted in the annual report that we just published in 2023. After the pilot phase, we moved to doing cumulative annual reports to track the tons of waste prevented or reduced from this program, the equivalent carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases emissions avoided, and a number of equity metrics, including the percentage of grantees that are BIPOC-led businesses or organizations primarily serving communities of color, jobs created, other metrics that are highlighted in this annual report that was just published and distributed to you, I think, 2 weeks ago now. And these metrics only represent the completed projects. We still have 40 additional grants underway, and so they are added to this report each year as the projects are completed. So next slide, please. So if the program is doing really well, as intended, and popular, why update it at this point? There's a few reasons. The original scope was very broad, and that was really appropriate for a pilot. But at this point, with the popularity of the program, we need clarity on the funding priorities to support our committees and reviewers in decision-making and transparency around what our priorities are for funding. And second, the funding landscape is very different than when the program launched in 2018. And third, the program has never been fully assessed and updated since it launched. We've done some tweaking around the focus areas for funding, but we have not done a comprehensive assessment of what we are targeting to fund through this program. So I'm going to talk about these in a little more detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So my colleagues at a run-through told me this slide was very chaotic, and I decided let's leave it in because this is an overview of just a handful of the 80 proposals that our grant review committee tried to weigh and prioritize against each other in making difficult funding decisions in the last grant cycle. There were 80 proposals requesting $13 million of grants for the $2 million available. And I just wanted to use this slide to kind of highlight the diversity of types of requests we're getting. At this point, everything from large capital investments in recycling and compost facility infrastructure, workforce development at reuse and repair organizations, $70,000 to expand a food rescue capacity at a food pantry, and a different grant to launch a new food rescue organization in a different part of the region, a small grant to test a recycling consumer app, equipment to upcycle food waste from farm crops and farmers markets, bicycle-powered mobile library, and many more each cycle. And all of these fit within the current funding scope of this program because it is very broadly scoped. So it's a difficult task for the reviewers, and as you can see, there's no shortage of opportunities to invest in the private sector. Next slide. We have grant review committees made up of local government, community, and non-solid waste business representatives and Metro staff. And in general, committee members that we have surveyed after each cycle report that serving on one of these committees is really meaningful and enjoyable experience, and also very stressful. And we've had numerous requests to please clarify how they should be prioritizing certain funding decisions. So this is also reflected in some feedback we've got from applicants that feel that our priorities are a little not as transparent as they could be. So next slide. And as I mentioned, we have a lot at play that wasn't at play when we launched this grant program. And we need to be reconciling this program with these other funding sources that are out there now. A big one is the Recycling Modernization Act, which is bringing producers of packaging will be providing recycling facilities pretty substantial amounts of funding, some recycling facilities, and they can use some of that funding to upgrade their facilities. So there are some questions about whether Metro should be funding things that the producer responsibility organizations are going to provide funding for, and other kind of policy decisions that need to be made around that. The RMA is also creating a reuse program that's in development. DEQ's materials management grants are back after a 3-year hiatus, and there's some overlap with this program. And then there's new EPA and other federal funding out there that we want to align with, make sure we're filling gaps and not duplicating, especially with the funding limits. Next slide. There's also several new policy projects and research out there. I'm not going to go through each of these just for time, but especially the System Facilities Plan. It's really highlighting needs and opportunities from the gap analysis that can really help us tailor where we should be targeting our efforts to align with that big project underway to plan our private sector, nonprofit sector, all of the players in the waste. There's a lot of information coming out of that process that can inform this grant program's development. Likewise, there's the bulky waste and large item reuse projects that we're piloting in WPES. Those can inform how we might invest investment and innovation funds in those problematic waste streams. All right, next slide. So now I'm getting to the project that we're proposing. We'd like to take the time to assess and update this grant program comprehensively. That would be a 2-phase process. First is to engage stakeholders to assess the needs and opportunities in the region. We heard a lot about public engagement this morning, and that's a tool we really want to align with and make sure that we have meaningful engagement. Phase 2 is updating the funding priorities based on what we hear from our many stakeholders. Those stakeholders include potential and actual applicants, which include for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, local colleges and universities, also our local government partners, Metro advisory bodies, and the Metro Council. It's also an opportunity to continue managing and catch up on 40 open grants, many of which had to be extended during the pandemic with supply chain issues. So we have a lot of active management of these grants that will happen at the same time as this assessment. The next slide. And this is also an opportunity to survey our applicants and really understand what it's like to apply for, receive, and manage investment and innovation grant. We have not reached out to our applicants, and it's been 5 years. I think it's time that we, as part of this engagement, learn what barriers might be out there to accessing these funds. We've seen more and more new organizations apply for our grants, but we suspect there's others out there, and we'd like to address some of the barriers and do that as part of some structural improvements as part of this process. Next slide. And we're very committed to an equity-centered process from start to finish. So we want to use Metro's racial equity framework that Gloria talked about this morning. It's a tool that helps Metro rethink how programs are designed and for whom, assess how decisions are made with an equity lens, and center marginalized communities. And also the public engagement guide that's in development will be very helpful. So I'm going to turn it over to Marta to talk about a couple of budget considerations.
So I want to just touch on those quickly. We shared with you our plans to assess the grant program this past summer at the same time that we were making the decision to purchase the RIB building. And if you go to the next slide, the assessment provided us with the opportunity to reallocate this year's fiscal's grant funds towards capital investment, including the RIB building purchase. And for next fiscal year, the budget is currently under development, as you know, and funding recommendations will be included in our proposed budget for council discussion.
Okay, next slide. So just a high-level timeline for the proposed project. We are assuming we would come back to council at the midway point in this process after the assessment phase to share some themes we heard from our stakeholder engagement and some initial staff recommendations for possible refinements to the funding priorities. We would then use that council direction to further develop the funding priorities and any other substantive changes to the program, and then come back to council with updates to the grant program guidelines and any other key decisions that need to be made. And then finally, we'd update the solicitation and committee processes. There's also a new committee recruitment process underway at the agency level, and then launch the next grant cycle estimated around fall 2025. This timing has an added benefit of aligning us better with FRS timelines. Our finance department has begged us to stop having grants that land, a bunch of grant contracts that land at the end of fiscal year, their busiest time. So this would be better timing for contracting all those grants. And next slide, I'm about done here. I just wanted one more piece of information. We went to the Regional Waste Advisory Committee last week to share this presentation and get some initial feedback. RWAC members agree with the need to assess and clarify the funding priorities. They note there's tensions in this program, even just in the name alone, between the different types of projects, from investing to stabilize what's working really well, versus an innovation to seed new creative ideas, between different applicant types. We have nonprofit applicants and for-profit applicants, and different levels of community benefit, between the need for ongoing funding for nonprofit organizations and one-time seed funding to launch new creative ideas. So RWAC advised we consider all this together and determine whether, or at least make some recommendations on whether it makes sense to maintain a program with so many tensions, or to go in a different direction. They suggested we consider longer funding cycles, so maybe a larger pot of money every other year to make longer grants that would help provide stability and predictability to recipients. So these are just some of their initial feedback, and we'll be headed back to RWAC during the assessment phase to get more in depth with some of these suggestions and others. And that brings me to the end. Next slide. So we just have a couple of questions at this phase, or at this at this point in the project, since it's just kind of queuing it up for you, what feedback do you have about the proposed approach for the grant program assessment and update? And are there any particular areas you think we should focus on as we proceed?
Counselors, Counselor Gonzalez and Rosenthal.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm so grateful that we created this program. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think Lynn made that recommendation in 2019. And so it's been awesome to just be able to allocate resources into this type of work. And I think I do completely agree that it's the right time, I think, to do a refresh and a reset. There's kind of like thinking about like reduce, reuse, recycle, like the axiom of our work there. And I think that reduce is, we have great education programs, great education partnerships. Recycling, I think we continue to make great investments. Where it feels like there's a bit of a gap in terms of where I think a really great opportunity for our funding to go is into reuse and investing in our reuse sector. We had that amazing proposal for Expo to consider. We move forward in a different direction, but I think if maybe it's like a bit of a hybrid in terms of, and I'm also thinking about the speakers that we brought in that have implemented different reuse concepts, and so I'm inspired by the work that's happening in other parts of the world. That I think it'd be great if we're able to find like a hybrid of maybe more direct funding to our core partners that are doing reuse. I think that would be a really great investment in that, and I think would probably stretch our dollars with privately matched dollars, foundation dollars, et cetera. So that's one thing. But I also see the benefit of maybe shrinking but still keeping a capital investment program that allows for both nonprofits and private partners to bring and pilot in the local area technologies that have demonstrated results in other parts of either the country or the world. So I'm excited for this process. It's kind of just casting my thoughts into the ether here, and excited to see what you come up with and bring to us.
Great, thank you so much. That's great feedback.
Counselor Rosenthal? No?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we go back to that last timeline slide? I thought I saw something that had raised a concern. It looked like you were.
I can't cast that. Can someone? Oh, thank you. She's on it. Okay.
That one? One more. Yeah. I would just change the last of it because you have the council engagement is the winter of 25, but you launch the next grant cycle in the fall of 25. I think you mean the spring of 2025 is council engagement.
That is an error. Thank you. We tweaked that at the last minute. That's just a mistake. I'm so sorry. Thank you for catching that.
That said,
way to attend to detail.
I just, at any rate,
Appreciate it.
That said, I think I support the process. Having been involved in the INI review process, sometimes I felt over the last two cycles, I felt sometimes I was trying to do a framing hammer job with or I should say a finish hammer job with a framing hammer. We didn't have quite the right criteria to be able to evaluate that and the process that we have still 40 projects that need to be managed. I think this is an appropriate time and an appropriate process to go forward. I think we need to redefine things. One of the big questions always was, to what extent is waste reduction prioritized over community enhancement and community benefit? And that question hung many times. And we had some answers, but not complete answers. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service on the committee the last 2 years. These are all why we want to do this, is that tension.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, I think this is an appropriate time to assess where our program has gotten us. And I do think that making sure we get lots of outside eyes, not only from those who are grant recipients and the folks who apply and aren't recipients, but we should also make sure to engage folks a little bit outside the normal bubble within the organization.
Sorry, could you just move it a little bit closer to you?
Yeah, outside the bubble, but still within the organizations that we do work with, because we are generally working with folks who are with us and understand the Metro way, but just one layer removed, and we might have a lot to learn. I hope that we can continue to use these funds in the future to develop relationship with local community. I think Councilor Gonzalez raised the idea of making sure that we have stable relationships with certain partners, and I think that's a compelling path forward. I also think that you had suggested spacing out the grants, having more money. I think that is one way the pendulum could swing. I might be going the other direction, more towards almost rolling applications. I think applications in this field that are competitive and compelling also have a sense of timeliness to them, and government would want to do something that takes a long time. And if we want to really be playing in this space where we are leveraging nonprofit and private, we can't take 2 years.
That's a good point. Thank
So
you.
I would hope that we might move to quarterly and have somebody help you, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
We did pilot that in 2019, a rolling grant cycle, and yeah, struggled to figure out how to do it with a committee. They would have to be on all the time, but I know it's possible, so yeah, we can explore that for sure.
There are lots of people who are excited to join committees.
It's true. Thank you.
If this current committee doesn't want to be on all the time, we will get it.
Yeah, it is possible, and that's something we'll include in the scope. Thanks.
Yeah, and I guess, finally, Marta, we've talked about the opportunity to also just come back stronger in our funding sense. So I think this is the appropriate time, given where we are with rate review and everything else. So let's do it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I think just in summary, this is a good time to be taking a deeper dive because of the bigger context of the questions that we've been having in terms of what our role is in this world, because we are straddling, as we have talked about, the regulatory and the participatory in the market, and how do we actually achieve the bigger public goals, right? And what is our role in doing that? And so I think the struggle is real, and I think trying to narrow that down. But I think we need to do it in the context of where are we headed in terms of Metro's role, and I think this will help. This will be one of those things that help us define what our role is. And I don't think that we're ever going to get to 100% regulatory, and I don't think we're going to get to 100% market. But I do think that I think we are feeling something's off, right? In that, in the which world do we have our feet in most, and how is that getting us to our outcomes? So I hope that this is one of those things that helps us clarify that. So thank you.
Great.
All right, Council, thank you for all the work that you have done to get us to that point. And we look forward to you coming back.
Great, thank you.
Chief Operating Officer Communications.
I will defer my updates until our next opportunity.
All right, thank
I
you.
have a big schedule.
Councilors, any communications for now?
No.
Councilor Lewis?
Sure, yes.
With a slight hand raise? It was just.
I'll be super quick. RTAP met yesterday, good meeting. We discussed at length revenue share. I report to the OTC on behalf of that table tomorrow.
Excellent.
Great, thank you. Councilors, any other? Okay, because I don't have my glasses on, so I'm looking for perceptional.
Send over email.
Yes. Seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 25th at 10:30 a.m. In 10 minutes, the council will reconvene in room 375 for an executive session held pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. Thank you.